Meghan Markle's latest British Airways story has just run into a serious problem. It seems that whenever things start going badly, whenever the narrative begins to unravel, an airplane-related story somehow appears right on cue. This is the same person who is reportedly described as one of the most difficult passengers ever to fly with the airline. Long before she met Prince Harry, there were claims that she was rude to flight attendants and frequently attempted to secure upgrades. There were also reports that during one flight, she refused to care for Archie while he cried for an extended period until a nanny eventually stepped in. Now, a card sitting on Meghan's Instagram account is creating three very obvious issues that simply don't match the version of events being promoted. These concerns aren't coming from tabloids, palace insiders, or people taking sides in the Sussex debate. They're coming directly from the card itself, from British Airways' own publicly available information, and from one very simple question that somehow much of the sympathetic media coverage has avoided asking. The question itself isn't complicated. In fact, it's only 7 words long. But once you slow down and carefully examine the card, those 7 words become more important than anything published in the People magazine feature, the Hello article, or even the GB News reports combined. That's the question we're looking at tonight. Because the British Airways anniversary card story isn't nearly as spontaneous or innocent as it first appeared. Once you take a closer look, it starts resembling a carefully assembled PR moment, built piece by piece from the flight itself to the Instagram post, and then to the media coverage that followed. And none of this requires secret sources or insider information. All it takes is reading the card carefully, checking the airline's own records, and paying attention to the places where the story doesn't quite fit together. There are only 3 things required here. Nothing more. No palace briefings, no anonymous sources, no confidential leaks. We even have wedding merching mixed into the story. What makes this especially remarkable is Meghan's claim that the British Airways crew on her flight from Europe to Los Angeles somehow knew it was her 8th wedding anniversary and decided to write a card describing what a delight she was as a passenger. The key facts are simple: the timeline, the publicly available flight information, and the exact wording used on the card. Yet, one of the most significant details in this entire situation isn't actually something written on the card at all. It's what's missing from the way the story has been connected together. To understand why, we need to establish the context first, because the background changes the way this entire episode reads. On May 18, 2026, a British Airways Boeing 777 operating as Flight B, A269 departed Heathrow Airport for a long-haul journey. Among the passengers in the premium cabin was one particularly high-profile traveler whose name appeared on the manifest, Meghan Markle. One name that does not appear anywhere in connection with that flight is Prince Harry. Harry has repeatedly said that he does not return to the United Kingdom, and during this period there is no confirmed evidence placing him at Heathrow, on the aircraft, or connected to this trip in any way. Coverage from multiple media outlets, including People magazine and Hello, also fails to place him on board. Even GB News presents the event as a solo travel story rather than a journey shared by the couple. The day before the flight adds another interesting layer. Meghan had been in Geneva attending a World Health Organization-related event where she spoke about social media and its impact on children. It was a public appearance designed to attract attention and promote that message. Ironically, she also posted a photo of herself preparing to leave for the event focused on cyberbullying and online safety. The event itself centered on protecting children from social media, yet critics quickly pointed out the contradiction of posting images involving her own child online. Whether the event drew a large audience or not, the criticism was there. From Geneva, she traveled toward Heathrow to continue the next leg of her journey. The routing fits a connection through London before heading onward to Los Angeles. Public flight tracking information and departure records show BA269 operating the final segment, leaving with a slight delay before eventually arriving in Los Angeles later that day. By itself, that's completely ordinary travel. But when viewed alongside everything that followed, it becomes the foundation for a very specific narrative. What we're left with is a single passenger taking a long-haul flight. One traveler seated in premium class, surrounded by other passengers and crew members, followed shortly afterward by an Instagram post. That's where the first contrast appears. One passenger, one documented flight, one social media post. Yet somehow a card addressed to two people, written as though both individuals were physically present during that moment. That becomes the first major point of friction in the story. On that aircraft were hundreds of passengers along with the cabin crew responsible for service throughout the flight. What is absent from every verified record, however, is Prince Harry himself. His name does not appear on the records, nobody reported seeing him, and there is no documented connection placing him on that flight. Yet somewhere during the journey, a celebratory card is presented alongside champagne, and suddenly the entire situation takes on a far more symbolic and carefully crafted tone. Then, by the following morning, that very same card shows up on Instagram. Not long afterward, an exclusive version of the story appears in People magazine, an outlet that has frequently published Sussex-friendly narratives. According to the article, Meghan Markle was deeply touched by the kindness of the British Airways crew, who helped commemorate her wedding anniversary with Prince Harry. The piece presents the event as a heartfelt gesture from airline staff and cites a source described as being close to the Duchess of Sussex. What's interesting is the speed of the timeline. The gap between the aircraft landing and the story appearing publicly is only about 12 to 18 hours. During that brief period, the Instagram post goes live, the narrative begins taking shape, and an exclusive media story is already circulating. That naturally raises several straightforward but uncomfortable questions. Who first reached out to the magazine? Who crafted the language that appeared in the published quotes? Who coordinated the timing between the social media post and the article itself? And how exactly did a moment aboard a flight transform so quickly into a polished feature story? Only the individuals involved in that process know every detail. But what matters for our purposes is what the timeline suggests when all the pieces are placed next to each other. And that takes us directly to the first notable detail on the card. The message begins with the greeting, "Dearest Harry and Meghan." At first glance, it may seem insignificant, but that wording immediately frames the note as being addressed to both members of the couple together. Once you compare that to the actual travel circumstances, the choice becomes much more interesting. Airline crew members generally write notes for the passenger sitting in front of them, not for someone whose presence on the aircraft has never been established. Which leads to an obvious question. If only one of the two named individuals was actually aboard the flight, how did the crew arrive at a greeting addressed to both? Was additional context provided beforehand? Was the anniversary already known and discussed in advance? Or was the wording prepared with information that had been communicated prior to departure? The public version of events presents the moment as completely spontaneous. Crew members are said to have approached Meghan, shared memories connected to the royal wedding, and marked the anniversary in a warm and emotional way. It's a story built around nostalgia and personal connection, with airline staff supposedly reflecting on where they were during the wedding and sharing those memories during the flight. But that account rests almost entirely on one unnamed source described as close to Meghan, speaking through a publication that has consistently carried Sussex-focused exclusives. And that is where the contrast becomes much sharper. The narrative being promoted depends heavily on that single source of information, while the physical evidence, the flight details, and the wording of the card itself raises a separate set of questions that remain unresolved. When you compare the story being told with the documented facts available, a noticeable gap emerges. And so far, that gap has not been clearly addressed. A closer examination of the card's wording and overall structure suggests that this was not simply a casual, spur-of-the-moment interaction. The message reads more like something that had already been shaped and framed before it was ever written down. The card doesn't say something informal such as, "Happy anniversary, Meghan." Instead, it formally opens with, "Dearest Harry and Meghan." That single decision establishes the entire framework of the message. It is not some minor detail that can be dismissed. It forms the foundation of the card itself and directly affects how the entire story is interpreted. Because if only one member of the couple was physically present, then the question remains. Why was the note written for two people? At that stage, there are really only a couple of plausible explanations. Either the crew assumed the anniversary message should include both names despite only one person being on board, which would be an unusual choice for a spontaneous in-flight gesture. Or the crew had already been given context that the note should celebrate the couple as a unit, meaning the framing existed before the card was written. And the more closely you study the card, the more structure begins to reveal itself. The handwriting is not consistent throughout the entire note. Most of the message appears in one style: careful, neat, and deliberate, looking more planned than rushed. Then another detail becomes obvious. The captain's message at the bottom is visually distinct and written in an entirely different hand. That immediately suggests this was not a one-person, off-the-cuff moment. Instead, it appears to be a collaborative message assembled in stages. At a minimum, 2 individuals contributed directly to the card. Potentially more, considering the way airline staff often coordinate service interactions and pass items among crew members. This was not a quick autograph or a hastily written note on a scrap of paper. It was a structured message involving multiple participants. And the most important point in all of this comes down to one thing: choice. The person who wrote the main message made a deliberate choice to center it around both individuals in the marriage. That decision was made during a flight where only one of those people is publicly confirmed to have been on board. That's not some insignificant wording preference. It shapes the entire narrative the card is trying to create. Then we arrive at the second major component of the card: the captain's message. Separate from the main note, it stands alone with its own structure and purpose. The message reads, "Lovely to have you on board. Congratulations on the anniversary. It is signed by Captain Ed French." This is more than just a signature or a quick addition at the bottom of the page. It's a complete and fully constructed statement that directly acknowledges a personal milestone. Importantly, it doesn't function as a simple follow-up to the earlier note. It exists as its own independent message, written and signed separately. Now stop for a moment and consider that from an operational standpoint. The captain of a long-haul aircraft such as a Boeing 777 is not typically spending spare moments creating personalized anniversary messages for passengers. Their responsibilities revolve around safety, flight management, crew coordination, scheduling, and the successful execution of the journey from departure to arrival. Before the aircraft even leaves the gate, a captain is dealing with manifests, crew briefings, technical reviews, weather assessments, operational procedures, and countless other tasks governed by strict airline protocols. There is no standard part of that workflow where a captain randomly decides to compose a personalized anniversary note without already being aware of the passenger's circumstances, which leads to a very direct question. How did the captain know about the anniversary in the first place? There are only a handful of realistic explanations. One possibility is that the passenger's team informed airline staff ahead of time, something that is not uncommon when high-profile travelers are involved. Another possibility is that the information came through internal airline systems containing loyalty or customer profile data that highlighted a significant personal milestone. A third possibility, though arguably the least likely, is that the captain independently became aware of the anniversary through publicly available information before the flight. Regardless of which explanation is correct, they all point back to the same central conclusion. This was not information discovered by chance. The anniversary detail existed somewhere within the process, whether through a system, a briefing, or prior communication, before the message was written. British Airways has publicly acknowledged that passenger personalization can occur through loyalty programs and executive club systems designed to enhance the onboard experience. Those systems are intended to help staff recognize customer preferences and important details. In other words, anniversary information is not outside the scope of what airline infrastructure can potentially handle. Personalization is a built-in feature of premium service. But the key issue here isn't whether those systems exist. The important question is whether they were actually used in this specific situation. And that's where the uncertainty begins. So far, there has been no direct statement from the airline explaining how the card came together, what information was available to staff, or what level of briefing took place before the flight. No public explanation, no detailed clarification, no official account describing how the personalization process worked in this particular case. And that absence of information becomes part of the story itself. Because when a high-profile passenger generates widespread media attention over an onboard experience, airlines will often issue a simple and neutral clarification if the event fits standard procedures. Usually it's something brief, something routine, just enough to acknowledge the attention and move forward. Yet in this case, there has been no such clarification, no confirmation, no explanation, no breakdown of whether the card resulted from normal customer recognition practices or something else. As a result, the situation remains suspended between two possible interpretations. Either this was a standard airline gesture supported by existing passenger data systems, or it was a more deliberately coordinated moment that relied on prior awareness and planning. And that brings us to the third layer of the story, the part that doesn't appear anywhere on the card itself. British Airways has publicly outlined in its privacy and service policies that loyalty and executive club systems can be used to personalize aspects of the passenger experience. Those systems may include customer preferences, travel patterns, and in some cases, information related to important personal milestones associated with frequent flyer accounts. Put simply, the infrastructure exists for airline staff to have access to relevant passenger information before a flight even begins. That isn't speculation. It's part of the airline's own published approach to customer service personalization. So the mechanism that could potentially explain how an anniversary became part of an onboard recognition moment is not hypothetical. The capability already exists within the broader system. The missing element is confirmation. Whether that capability was actually used in this particular instance has never been publicly verified by the airline. No official statement has been released. And until that happens, the question remains unanswered. No explanation has been offered regarding whether this was the result of automated personalization systems or a manually coordinated acknowledgement. And when several major British media outlets reportedly attempted to obtain clarification, they were met with the same response from the airline: silence. That silence matters. Under normal public relations circumstances, especially when a positive celebrity-related story gains traction online, companies are usually eager to reinforce the goodwill. A brief statement acknowledging the event would often be enough to complete the narrative and benefit from the favorable attention. But that didn't happen in this case. Instead, what we're left with is a card that was publicly shared, a carefully worded message from the captain, a media rollout through People magazine, and a timeline that moves remarkably fast from flight to Instagram to exclusive coverage, without any clearly explained connection linking those stages together. And at the center of the entire story remains the same unresolved issue. How did a message addressed to two people end up being created on a flight where only one of those individuals is publicly confirmed to have been present? That question still has not been fully answered. Across multiple inquiries, the response has remained exactly the same: silence. And it doesn't feel like accidental silence. It feels controlled, deliberate, and carefully maintained. This is not the silence of an organization that doesn't know what people are asking. It feels more like the silence of an organization that understands the question perfectly well and has chosen not to address it publicly. Because when a company the size of British Airways declines to clarify something that would ordinarily be straightforward to explain, it naturally creates another layer of curiosity. If the entire situation was simply a spontaneous gesture, a short statement could have resolved the matter immediately. Instead, there has been no confirmation, no correction, no explanation, and that leaves several possibilities on the table. Perhaps it involved passenger data systems. Perhaps there were arrangements made before the flight. Perhaps there was some degree of coordination that the airline has no interest in publicly discussing. Only British Airways knows the definitive answer. But the decision to remain silent, even while receiving positive publicity, is precisely what makes that silence so noticeable. At the same time, royal commentators and correspondents were watching the week's events unfold in real time. Tom Sykes, who had already reported on Meghan's appearance in Geneva, observed how anniversary-related content seemed to be appearing across multiple platforms with a noticeable pattern in both timing and presentation. Meanwhile, Alison Beauchoff, speaking during Palace Confidential, described the week's output as a coordinated push that appeared designed to direct attention toward broader branding efforts. Richard Eden took the criticism even further, expressing concern about the use of personal family imagery within larger commercial narratives. These are not fringe voices commenting from the outside. They are journalists operating within the same media environment, examining the same sequence of events, and drawing attention to similar patterns. Within that broader content cycle, the British Airways card becomes one of the most emotionally effective pieces of the entire puzzle. It's simple, it's warm, it's visually appealing, and it's easy for audiences to connect with and share. It fits neatly into a narrative built around kindness, celebration, and human connection during an otherwise ordinary travel experience, which is exactly why understanding how it came together matters. To be fair, none of the individual elements by themselves prove anything. The fact that the card references Harry and Meghan could, in isolation, simply reflect a general assumption about the couple. The captain's message could theoretically stem from casual awareness of the anniversary through conversation or routine briefing information. And British Airways' privacy and personalization policies merely confirm that such systems exist. They do not establish that those systems were actually used in this specific situation. Viewed separately, each explanation remains plausible. But when all three elements are placed side by side, the pattern becomes more difficult to ignore. A card addressed to two people when only one is confirmed to have been on board. A captain composing a complete personalized message acknowledging an anniversary. And an airline that openly acknowledges having systems capable of tailoring passenger experiences. All of those elements appear within the same tightly timed media cycle. Each one can be explained individually. Collectively, however, they become harder to casually dismiss without some form of clarification. And that ultimately brings us back to the most important issue of all, not the card itself, but the reaction surrounding it. Because if everything about this situation was entirely routine and standard, confirmation would normally arrive very quickly. Airlines generally do not remain silent when a positive story about crew kindness and customer service begins attracting widespread attention. A brief statement would usually be enough to verify the circumstances and move forward. Yet no such statement was ever issued. Instead, the story continued to grow through Instagram, through People magazine, through British media coverage, and through a series of anonymous sources, all pointing back toward the same narrative. And throughout that entire process, British Airways has never publicly explained how the card was created, or whether any internal personalization systems played a role. So what remains is a timeline constructed from observable events, missing confirmations, and lingering questions. A passenger boards a long-haul flight. A card is written during the flight. A captain adds a personalized anniversary message. The next morning, that card appears on Instagram. Soon afterward, an exclusive story was published by People magazine. And through all of it, there is still no official explanation connecting each step of that sequence. So this is where things ultimately stand. Three details continue to stand out above everything else. First, the card is addressed to both members of the couple, even though only one passenger has been publicly confirmed to have been on board. Second, the captain demonstrates specific awareness of the anniversary itself. And third, the airline has acknowledged that it possesses systems capable of personalizing passenger experiences, yet has remained completely silent when asked to clarify whether any of those systems played a role here. Take another look at the card. Read the captain's message once more. Then ask yourself why the note is addressed to Harry and Meghan when only Meghan has been confirmed as a passenger on that flight. And ask why an airline that would normally welcome positive publicity has chosen not to explain a moment that, on the surface, should be relatively straightforward to verify. Without that clarification, people are left to draw their own conclusions from the information that is publicly available, the details that are documented, and the questions that remain unanswered. That's where the discussion stands today. So now I'll leave it with you. Do you believe this was simply an unexpected gesture from the crew that coincidentally aligned in a highly unusual way? Or do you think the timing, the wording, and the continued silence point towards something more happening behind the scenes than has been publicly acknowledged? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, Be sure to like the video and subscribe to Palace Insider for more analysis and coverage like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.